Hey guys, I just wanted to run through a couple of things for 1984. As we're starting into it, we'll probably start reading a little bit of it next week. Don't worry about finding a copy of it. I have a copy of it for you. It'll be on Canvas. It'll be a digital copy, but you're welcome to go out and buy one. You're welcome to go out and purchase one. But it's not necessary. We'll have a digital copy available for you. But just wanted to go over a couple of things before we start into the novel on next week. Don't forget, you got 3 assignments due this week. I think it was 3 assignments due this week. And they're all on Canvas. So just make sure that you complete those. Those have to be in by Friday night at 11:59. So make sure you get that all squared away and taken care of for 1984. So George Orwell, he is the author. It is a political novel, and it's a dystopian novel. So you do need to know about that. If you've heard the phrase, Big Brother is watching you, that comes from this. And just a couple of things on there that this is definitely a dystopian novel controlled by the government with indoctrination. There's fear, lies, ruthless punishment. And it's called 1984 because it was actually written in 1948. And he kind of anticipated that, George Orwell anticipated that if we continue on these paths the way they are, that in 1984, it would be what would happen. So surprisingly, it is pretty close to what is happening in the government right now. But you can go through some information on George Orwell, and he is a British author, so this is part of BritLit here. So there's some information there. You might want to just buzz through that a little bit about him. I'm not going to go over everything because I want to make this video kind of short and sweet. But after World War II, things that George Orwell was concerned with that became pretty much a reality were taxes, rationing, nationalization. Basically, it was like a war of attrition where everything was dictated towards the war. Railroads, airlines, steel industry, banking, medicine, everything like that was kind of thrown at the war. So he was very much anti-Soviet communism, very much against that, very much against the Cold War, very much against governments controlling everything. So he really just did not like Stalin at all. Everybody talks about Hitler, but Stalin was just as ruthless, if not more. I think the big thing about Stalin was there were no records of how many people he actually killed, whereas the Nazis, they kept detailed records of everything. And so Joseph Stalin really was the more ruthless of the two, but again, records weren't kept as meticulous as the Nazis were. So anybody that went against the government, they were pretty much either imprisoned or they were killed. So just alone in 1940, 7 million died. Everybody talks about 6 million Jews, but that was over the course of the entire Holocaust. But under Joseph Stalin's rule, 7 million people died. So that's one of the things that they discuss, how the government was all controlling. So setting takes place in a futuristic cautionary novel, basically cautionary meaning don't do these things or our society will end up like the way it is. But it does take place in London in a mythical country called Oceania. So in the future, now again, this was written in 1948, but he kind of predicted that this would happen in 1984. So 3 countries that are involved in it are really kind of 3 continents. You have Eurasia, East Asia, and Oceania. So, they basically, Orwell gives a glimpse of how the government controls everything with private thoughts, even down to controlling how you think. So here's kind of a map of what that looks like. Oceania, which includes the United States, North America, South America, part of Africa, got a little bit over here into Australia, a little bit of the parts of the islands in Asia over here. And then mostly part of this would be China and East Asia. Of course, you got Japan over here, and then you have Vietnam and Korea over here, all of these countries that are pretty much part of that. But mostly all of Europe, except for the British Isles over here, all of Europe and Russia are part of Eurasia. So anything that's in the gray is kind of disputed territories. Nobody's really accounting for that. So there's a lot of wars that happen within this here. So you got Madagascar down here, you got almost all of Northern Africa, mostly the Middle East is disputed territories. Part of India is in disputed territories down here as well. So those are all part of the countries, I guess, if you want to call it, that are disputed. So within Airstrip 1, it's the most populous province of Oceania. You have the capital is London, and Oceania is created when the United States is absorbed by England. So we're kind of backtracking a little bit here, whereas England controlled everything prior to us winning our independence. So now we've kind of stepped back. So it's led by a dictator by the name of Big Brother. And if you kind of look at him here, this picture, he looks a little bit like Stalin. You can even say arguably, you can argue that he looks a little bit like Hitler as well. So that was something that he wanted to make sure that people knew about. So, but he controls everything through terror. So there's certain ranks in 1984. Of course, the party is ruled by Big Brother, and you have a couple different parties. So you have the inner party, which is about 1% to 2% of the population that controls the country. So not a whole lot, but they control the vast majority of the country. They are the ruling elite. Then you have the outer party. There's about 13 to 18% of the population that's controlled by still the inner party. So you're starting to get a little bit more here. They don't make decisions, they do work, but then you have the proles, and they are roughly about 81 to 85% of the population. These numbers kind of fluctuate because there were different interpretations of the text. So, but they are the working force. They're the masses of society, but they're not very bright. They basically work, they go to movies, they drink their beer, there's even state-produced pornography. So they don't think for themselves. They pretty much go along with what is happening in society. So if you look at that, the inner party really is controlling 98 to 99% of the population, which is kind of scary, that you have only 1% to 2% of the population making decisions for the outer party in the proles. So kind of scary there. So, but there is a secret brotherhood, this underground rebellion that is organized by a man by the name of Goldstein. Goldstein is the one that is basically going to try to overthrow Big Brother in the inner party. So you got 4 different ministries. We got Ministry of Peace, Ministry of Love, Ministry of Plenty, and Ministry of Truth. Now, anytime you want to try to decide what these are, think of the opposite. So Ministry of Peace really deals with Ministry of War. Ministry of Truth really deals with lying and really kind of putting out what the government is saying. Ministry of Love is the prisons, and Ministry of Plenty deals with rationing. So there's 3 slogans you need to be aware of, and they're basically paradoxes. We've learned about that back in Macbeth, but it's basically a contradictory statement. So freedom is slavery, war is peace, ignorance is strength. You'll get to that as you get into the novel. So they're oxymoronic. They contradict each other. It's kind of like the phrase jumbo shrimp. How can shrimp be jumbo when it's small? So contradictory phrases there. So the Brotherhood is this underground rebellion, as I said before, and it's led by a man by the name of Emmanuel Goldstein. So the government controls things through thought police. So they have cameras everywhere, even down to workstations that people are at, even down to people's apartments. you'll notice that the main character, Winston, he is constantly being aware of these cameras that are everywhere. So telescreens, those are basically monitors that are everywhere. So no matter where you look, there's cameras, there's televisions everywhere that control your thoughts and actions. So kind of think about even walking through the commons, the student center, you got two TVs everywhere. So telescreens are everywhere. If you walk down, if you ever go to New York City and Times Square, there's telescreens everywhere. So you need to be aware of what doublethink is. It's the ability to hold two thoughts at the same time. And the party is the only institution that really knows the right from wrong. So remember, the vast majority of the people in society are basically blindly following what Big Brother is saying, what the inner party says. So our main character, Winston, who is over here, he works for what's called the Ministry of Truth. He's actually part of the outer party. So he's like that 13 to 18% of the population that, changes facts and history and memories to promote the government looking good. So Winston works at the Ministry of Truth and uses something called a speak right, which basically you speak into it and it comprehends what you're saying. Kind of sounds like Siri or whatever you're using, Lexia or Alexi, anything like that. So the Newspeak is called the official language of Oceania, and it's basically, the goal is to replace Old Speak, which is standard English. So basically what it does is it invents new words to enforce commonality. So basically, again, this is a cautionary novel to prevent, we don't want this to happen. So Orwell believed that if we continued on the path that we were, that it would end up like this. So the phrase Big Brother is watching you, that comes from this novel. So dystopia, we've gone over this when you watched or when you read Fahrenheit 451. So I think you kind of know what that. Utopia is a perfect society. Dystopia obviously has some sort of problem with it, but there's many ways to control it through corporate, bureaucratic, technological, and philosophical. And I think in 1984 in Oceania, all of these are maintained through corporate, bureaucratic, technological, and philosophical. So I'm not going to go through that. You can look through it if you want. Propaganda, figurehead, freedom is restricted, citizens are under constant surveillance, dehumanized, and there's uniform expectations. Even down to the commercial that you guys watched earlier this week, which is kind of a odd commercial that came out during the Super Bowl. But you notice everybody's kind of in a uniformed fashion. And then you have this woman that comes out and changes the way that people look. So that's very much standard of dystopian society. This is kind of our protagonist, what they tend to do. The dystopian protagonist, you can kind of look at that diagram if you want. We see dystopian movies and books all over the place. Some very popular ones out there. Depending on when we come back, we will be watching V for Vendetta, which is very loosely based on 1984. So let's talk about some of the characters. Winston is our main character of the story. He is a low-ranking member of what's called the outer party or the ruling party, but he secretly hates Big Brother. He has dreams of creating a revolution. He's very thin, frail, contemplative, intellectual, very unhealthy though. He's sick of his job and he knows that what he's doing is kind of fabricating the truth, which is kind of telling lies. But he is in love with a girl by the name of Julia. Now, Julia is 25 years old. She's beautiful. She's part of what's called the Anti-Sex League, but the Anti-Sex League actually does the opposite of what they say. So we'll get to that later on in the book. But she also wants to be part of this rebellion. We're going to have a special guest here, my son, Jason. Come here, Jason. Come here. He's just waking up from bed. Can you say hi?
Hi. All right, go play. Okay. Okay.
So you have a character by the name of O'Brien, who is a mysterious, powerful, sophisticated member of the Inner Party, but Winston kind of believes that he's part of this underground brotherhood that Goldstein's part of. So, but Winston trusts him, does not quite figure him out though. Mr. Charrington, you won't get to him until later on in the text, but he owns an apartment that actually doesn't have a telescreen, which is extremely rare. And he rents this out to where Winston and Julie are. So he is very supportive of Winston's rebellion. So Big Brother, we said we kind of is like a godlike image, and he looks a lot like Hitler and Stalin. So that's kind of a summary of what you're going to be looking at, some of the novel components in that. So if you have any questions as we're going throughout, please let me know. We probably won't start reading until sometime next week. I'm going to sit down with Miss Norman, and some of the other English 4 teachers, Miss Tipple, to try to come up with a reading schedule for that. So, but hopefully I'll see you sooner than later. Obviously May 1st now is what our deadline is. So hopefully I'll see you shortly then. So take care, stay healthy, miss you guys, and talk to you soon. Bye.